The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.
What do you want readers to take away from this book?
What I'd like them to take away is the notion that they're being manipulated, or at least there are attempts to manipulate pretty much every image that's thrown at people, whether it's in the news media, on billboards, on social media. There is some sort of special paid interest behind those messages, often in hidden ways that they haven't even thought about. And if they can become more educated about some of these tactics and techniques, I think they can become smarter consumers of it.
For those who could be cast as political opponents or critics of the Obama administration, do you think, based on your experience, that there's legitimacy to concerns that their privacy it could be threatened? And what are some red flags? And what happened to you?
Well, I think there is very real concern among not just members of the media, but I could tell you members of Congress and their staff, that if they fall on the wrong side of this administration, that they are being monitored or could be monitored, their telephone calls, the things that they do, their emails. There's now a common belief among many in Washington that they are being monitored. And I can tell you that I've had conversations with members of Congress on the telephone who will stop at some point and say, I can't tell you on the phone because your phone is bugged. Or some people have told me all the emails coming out of the White House, they believe, from press are being monitored by the White House. So there's almost this tacit acceptance of the idea that what we do is being watched, and surprisingly, very little outcry. I mean, nobody likes it, but nobody's really stood up to do anything about it. In my case, as I talk about in the book, I sort of stumbled across the right kinds of sources and people who were able to examine my computer and tell me that the government had indeed intruded upon it. We know the date and the time that some of the intrusions came in. We know how it came in. We know what they were doing. And one of the most shocking things, as I talk about in the book, is one of my analysts who helped reveal all of this for me said someone planted 3 classified documents in my computer. So whoever was in it, according to the people who looked at my computer, must have been looking for a way to either frame me in the future or frame a source that I was talking about, to be able to say, if they ever needed to, that there were classified documents that had changed hands, when that really wasn't the case. I think this is a really chilling and dangerous development, that anybody would be in my computer doing such things, and I'm outraged by it. I really am.
I would think any journalist or your bosses would have been outraged by it. So what was the reaction at CBS, and what was the reaction to your peers?
I was surprised by sort of the lack of alarm at CBS, because I was always taught that if there was any sort of computer intrusion into the corporate system, which we had proven had taken place, that there would be alarm bells going off at the highest levels. This was a very serious event. I immediately, when I had my analysis done, notified my superior, and his response was, well, your sources who gave you this information are confidential. Let's confirm this ourselves before we go to the news division president with it. And I'm thinking, yes, that's a good idea, but shouldn't somebody right now, just on the basis of what I've told you, shouldn't there be some sort of security measures taken? But instead, they did send their own analyst to my house to look into the computers, my personal and my CBS computer, and he immediately found evidence of a remote intrusion, highly sophisticated access, as had my own analyst. And so he notified in sort of an urgent email, he notified CBS, and once again there was very little sense of alarm. They did go forward with a further analysis to try to dig deeper, but this took months and months. This was several months before the Associated Press story came out. This was several months before Ed Snowden made his revelations. So there was none of this on the national table yet. This was happening to me, but I really had no context or comparison for what was going on. But I believe simultaneously many things were happening to journalists in Washington, D.C., and I was just one of them. In the end, after many months went by, CBS ultimately kind of called me into a meeting. The president of the company, of the news division, was there, as well as my immediate superior, and they said, look, we've confirmed this, congratulations, we're happy to finally, be on board with you, we're behind you 1,000% in this horrible thing that's happened to you, and we'll stop at no measures to try to figure out, exactly the name of the people who did it, the names of the people who did it. And then it kind of fell off from there. I found out on my own, just through other people at CBS, that we actually have a special unit that should be looking at these sorts of things, but had never contacted me. And I contacted them, found out that the head of the special unit is actually a former NSA official. So the guy working at CBS came from the Obama administration and had not contacted me. You would think this would be right up his alley of the sort of thing he'd be very concerned about on behalf of the corporation, since the intrusion had been in the CBS computers and the CBS system. But I just found very little interest. And when I reached out to him and said, want to make sure you know about this intrusion that happened, he didn't answer the first email. I persisted, and I got a very curt response that said, yes, we're aware, rest assured we're doing everything we can. And that's all I ever heard. What surprised me was no one ever, unlike Associated Press, when it was learned that the government had pulled their phone records without telling them and so on, they went through great measures when they found that out to try to protect their sources, protect their reporters, use new security measures so it would be hard to infiltrate and listen to their private conversations. Nothing happened on the CBS end. Nobody came to my house. Nobody asked about sources of mine that might have been compromised or who needed to be protected now or in the future. There was just very little, I would say, natural reaction to something that I think was really one of the most serious things that I can imagine happening to a journalist.
So how have they tried to target you? What are the worst things that have happened as you've developed your thirst for the truth?
In my case, it hasn't been terribly effective because I see that as the idea that you're onto something. The stories that Media Matters has gone after me on, in every instance I've either won an Emmy Award recognition with or an Edward R. Murrow Award by independent journalism peers. So what they say is meaningless to me. The only problem is I think they're not trying to speak to me so much, they're trying to speak to an uninformed audience. And if they can put out a lot of stories that then somehow show up very high on the search engines, if you Google a story, that's going to be the first one that comes up. I think they hope to influence a certain group of people who are otherwise not informed. Because let's face it, people who are already entrenched in their views aren't going to change their mind one way or another. But there may be a small percentage of people out there, or a significant percentage they may feel, that could be influenced by this material they put out on the web, so they put out a lot of it. They also try to generate the impression that there's a big movement, it's sort of an astroturf effort, a big movement against a story, for example. So they target a story if they know it's coming before, during, and after. I'm speaking of many interests, not just the one Hillary Clinton's Media Matters group, but other groups too. They know how to manipulate the press, and we're less sophisticated in fighting back against the tactics and techniques that they have. But prior to a story, they'll call executives in a network, the anchors of the broadcast. They start lobbying about, hey, this truth isn't going to be told, and so-and-so is doing the story. We want to make sure you have the true story, and things like that. They write letters to the bureau chief. The White House will constantly call and barrage my bosses with letters and kind of lobby them and put out spin to them. And then after a story, they always object, and you'll see other journalists from New York Times, Washington Post, and so on who have complained about the same thing, that even the tiniest thing the White House will complain about. And one journalist said, well, they're so sensitive. I've never seen anything like it. I don't think they're sensitive. I think they have meetings probably twice a day, and they decide who's going to object to what story, that anything slightly negative, if they just throw things at it, they hope that over time there creates a weariness on the part of the news reporters that they just won't want to go there, or maybe they begin to self-censor, or maybe the stories become a little more positive because the bosses don't want to get that letter from the White House next time. And I can tell you there is some of that. I think it's somewhat effective. I also think it's important that you call the media on it. A lot of people see these things for what it is, and they just sort of shrug their shoulders and say, I can't believe this story's happening and nobody's reporting it. Or I can't believe this attack happened and the government called it workplace violence and we all know it's terrorism, but nobody's saying that. Call them on it. Don't be silent. You can change things. You can get more of the truth out there if you let them know, and there are many ways to do it today with social media and so on. You let them know you see what they're doing.
The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.